Hello and welcome to An Old Man Watches. And today I'm going to be talking about two blaxploitation films starring Pam Grier, Coffee from 1973 and Foxy Brown from 1974. And in the first of these films, Coffee, the title character, played by Pam Grier, is a decent person who is filled with anger over the escalating violence in her home city and the burgeoning drug scene, which has led to her sister becoming a heroin addict. Her grievances are further compounded when her friend Carter, who is perhaps the only honest cop on the force, is savagely beaten in his own home by his crooked colleagues. Masquerading as a prostitute, Coffee sets out to bring a very lethal form of street justice to the men responsible. Meanwhile, in Foxy Brown, the title character, played by Pam Grier, is a decent person who is filled with anger over the escalating violence in her home city and the burgeoning drug scene, which leads to the death of her boyfriend, a government agent. Masquerading as a prostitute, Foxy sets out to bring a very lethal form of street justice to the men responsible. If those two summaries sounded very similar to you, there's a good reason for that. They're very similar films, plot-wise. Obviously, a lot of the details are different, but generally the premise, the scenario from which they start, very similar. The overall arc, pretty much the same. And it's pretty clear, released the year after Coffee, written and directed by the same person, starring the same person from the same production company. Foxy Brown is pretty transparently an attempt to further cash in on what had proved in Coffee to be an effective and profitable cinematic cocktail. It treads a lot of the same narrative ground as a consequence. It's my opinion that Coffee is definitely the stronger of the two films. I did quite enjoy Foxy Brown, but I did spend a lot of the time thinking Coffee did this better. In any case, the two films share a lot of similarities in content and tone, and that's why I'm going to talk about them both together, because I think ultimately if I was to try and talk about Foxy Brown by itself, I'd spend most of my time talking about Coffee. But let's dive in and see what there is to talk about. So first of all, both of these films, as I mentioned, written and directed by the same person, Jack Hill. Hill had previously worked with Pam Grier on the women in prison exploitation films The Big Dollhouse and The Big Birdcage, just a couple of years before. And those prior experiences led him to specifically ask for Grier to play Coffee, and he made a good choice in that regard. Grier has the intensity and the physicality to convincingly be the shotgun-wielding Avenger that these films require, while also having the sensuality that the scripts demand. Remember that these, after all, blaxploitation films. And that means not just that they aim to exploit African-American culture and audiences, though they certainly do that, but also that they are exploitation films more generally, with the violence and nudity and salacious content that exploitation films tend to entail. And finally, Grier was a good choice because Coffee, in particular, requires someone who can portray the stress of having blood on your hands. Not innocent blood, perhaps, but her lethal vigilante actions definitely have an effect on her mental health. And Grier is a good enough actor to show how Coffee's vigilante antics do have a negative effect on her mental health without overdoing that and overselling that and coming off as camp and silly. She's a very good lead in this. And it's kind of a shame that when the blaxploitation film boom ended, that she spent a long time kind of not getting any lead work until Quentin Tarantino in the late 90s cast her in Jackie Brown, because I think she really did have some ability as an actor. Does still have some ability as an actor. And it's good to see that she did have a renaissance in her career later in life. Secondly, these are very much 70s films. And despite the massive financial troubles of that decade, such as the first oil crisis and a long period of high unemployment with high inflation, which was something that conventional economics of the time said shouldn't be possible, the 70s were also a time of opulent clothing and decor and extravagance in look. Bold colours and designs abounded. Huge hair, bell-bottom pants, sequin jumpsuits, and other fashion choices that look outrageous and silly to modern eyes. And music, went in a similar direction. Progressive rock and disco might be very different sounds, but both are unabashedly unrestrained and turned up to 11, Spinal Tap style. And where goes the rest of popular culture, so too goes the film industry. I think Coffee in particular of these two films has a winning sense of bombast. The soundtrack doesn't just set the tone in each scene, it has actual plot exposition in the lyrics. So the people, the lyrics that the singers are singing are actually about the scene. They're telling you the story. And there's an iconic scene in Coffee where she is forced into a brawl with 4 prostitutes. She doesn't just beat them down, she rips off their tops in the process, because of course she does, it's an exploitation film. She also proves to have found a uniquely 70s way to hide weapons while wearing barely any clothes. It's a fun, silly, over-the-top scene, but it works really well because they all sell it. Foxy Brown can't quite recapture the same inventiveness, though it is certainly also full of extravagant 1970s fashion and tunes. Finally, blaxploitation films generally had a jaundiced view of authority, and I think that's pretty understandable. Even today, African Americans are far more likely to be arrested. They are far more likely to be seriously punished if found guilty of a crime than white people are. And Coffee and Foxy Brown, to a lesser extent, but Coffee in particular, unabashedly anti-establishment. The title character takes justice into her own hands because she cannot get it anywhere else. Everybody in a position of power is corrupt. In her eyes, the whole law is utterly corrupt. And when she says as much, even the one good cop that she knows can only protest not all of it, not yet. It's very much a film that casts the establishment as a villainous, oppressive force. But these films are not just about fighting the man in terms of the sense of the man as the establishment, but also in terms of female empowerment against male oppression. Now that may be an odd claim, or it sound like an odd claim for me to make about exploitation films where most of the female characters are prostitutes and which feature considerable amounts of naked female flesh. And I'm certainly not arguing that the films don't have problematic elements. They absolutely do. But Coffee in particular has been studied by, actual people who study this stuff for its feminist elements. This is not just me saying this. This is, studies have been done. And it does, after all, depict a strong, capable woman who holds a successful career and who ultimately triumphs over the corrupt men who have blighted her life. It's kind of a proto-feminist film, a very specific kind of proto-feminist film, and certainly a film that has non-feminist elements, but there are some feminist elements too. If you have a hankering for some shotgun-packing, two-fisted 70s action, you could definitely do a lot worse than these films, in particular Coffee. I mean, if you're only going to watch one, watch Coffee. If you're going to watch them both, I don't know which order. I mean, if Coffee is a better movie, it came out first, maybe watch that first, but then wait a while before you see Foxy Brown. If you can only find Foxy Brown, though, you should enjoy it, because you won't be sitting there going, Coffee was better, like I was. But that's Coffee and Foxy Brown. Next time, we venture into 1980s post-apocalyptica with the Canadian film Defcon 4. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.